Hi, I'm Allison Bukowski, and this is the CustomerX Files. I'm delighted to bring my years of marketing experience to the amazing community that supported me throughout my career. My passion has always been elevating the customer to the focal point of all marketing initiatives, and I'm proud to now lead a marketing organization with a truly customer-led approach. Each episode, I'm joined by an incredible thought leader within the marketing industry, generous enough to share their insights, knowledge, and experience with all of us. Brought to you by the PeerSpot Network, nothing is off limits. And just as our industry continues to evolve, so will this podcast. We will feature guests in live Q&A sessions, panel discussions, and more. So let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome. So today I am very excited to be chatting with Evan Huck, the CEO and co-founder of User Evidence. After graduating from Stanford, Evan started his career as an SDR, sales development representative, but I don't have to tell anyone here what the acronym stands for, and worked his way from that role as an SDR to a VP of sales. Prior to founding User Evidence, Evan actually led enterprise sales for SurveyMonkey and scaled startup Tech Validate, which was then acquired by SurveyMonkey. And he is largely responsible from driving revenue efforts from zero to over $20 million, which is a very impressive feat. Evan also advises multiple startups. He's done this a time or two and knows a few things about B2B enterprise sales and go-to-market strategy. And he's also an active angel investor and LP in GTM Fund. Evan lives in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. That's home with his wife and 2-year-old daughter. And of course, have to mention the dog, the golden retriever. And in his free time, Evan can be found skiing in the Tetons or DJing. Yes, that's right, DJing house or electronic music. And we're going to get to that in a second. But first, welcome, Evan, to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Allison. Excited to be here.
Okay, let's get back to the DJing thing before we dive into the professional stuff here, because we all know that I'm a big people before professionals person. Yeah. So I saw your video on LinkedIn. That was your wedding, and you did some DJing. So lots of questions, but I was thinking, and I have to ask, so since you clearly love music, what is your personal anthem? And what I mean by that is like the song that you just crank up when you need to feel good or get pumped, and it's okay if it's a guilty pleasure. Just really curious what it is for you and why.
Yeah, so fun fact, I actually DJ'd Coachella one time. For those who know what Coachella is, it's a big festival out in LA. And one of the first artists I saw there that got me into electronic music was Justice, which is like a French DJ duo. And so one of their songs, Genesis, is my pump up amp.
That's it. And what is it about electronic dance music?
It's just fun. If you've ever been to a show like that, it's obviously high energy, easy to dance to for people who aren't so dance inclined. You basically just kind of pump your fists.
So that would be
so yeah, it works well. But no, I love it. It's cool. It's more fun to play too as an actual DJ, like controlling a whole crowd is pretty cool feeling. So yeah, we love it.
That's awesome. And I it's only fair that I answer my own question, although everyone now is going to know that you are so much cooler than I am, because even though if you ask me about favorite artists, it would be Tom Petty. But I'm not going to lie to you that there's a song by Richard Marx called Satisfied. I don't know what it is, but it is the one, and I play it just like to either feel good or, achieving something. It's the go-to. So yeah, you're cooler than me because my go-to is Richard Marx. What can I say?
That's pretty cool too.
So let's talk a little bit. We're going to kind of dive into a topic that I think could go a variety of different directions today. And it's a hot topic, and it has been, I think, always this whole like quantity versus quality, quality versus quantity. But before we do that, tell us a little bit about User Evidence and the work that you're doing and how it helps folks in a customer-led marketing function. And I think it'll then become also very clear why you and I are together today to have this conversation.
Yeah. So I've been in B2B SaaS for 12 years. I would say, over that time frame, it's tough for vendors because there's just probably a declining kind of trust of vendors, and everyone's got rightly so, a natural skepticism. So customer evidence and social proof or customer voice or
It's
whatever you want to call it
important for coaching purposes.
is a lot more important these days. And user evidence is a way for vendors to basically harness the voice of their happy customers and create customer stories at scale. So for people that are in customer marketing, it just takes away a lot of the kind of down level customer story creation, tactical content creation work, which is important, but kind of gets tedious and hopefully allows them to focus on more, strategic customer advocacy stuff.
And you and I have had, some conversations, and we talk a lot about reviews, right? And obviously, everything that you just described, we can kind of see the natural intersection there. But I'm curious, like, where were you, and when did you realize this vital importance of user reviews in a buyer's journey and the decision-making process?
Well, there's probably a personal answer than a business answer. Personal one actually goes back to the DJ stuff. So when I bought my first set of DJ decks as a Pioneer CDJ 1000s and a DJM 800 mixer, that was in sophomore year of college, and that was a huge chunk of my money at the time. And so obviously you want to make sure you get that choice right. And so that was the first time where I had the really a high consideration purchase where I did a lot of research online and dug into communities and found some really great sources of peer-based reviews and information on these particular set of decks. And so, I think that when you're in purchase is important, that's when you really want to know from other people that have used that product that look like you that it's going to work. So that was my first business or personal encounter with it. Business-wise, actually, it's interesting. I was starting user evidence and went to go look for a CRM because it had been a while. I'd used Salesforce, but I figured there was a bunch of new stuff out there, and went to a review site and saw about 98 options. I was like, holy crap, this is overwhelming, first of all. But obviously that was I probably picked the top 10 vendors in the upper right hand quadrant, and that started my short list. So that was another junction where I realized wow, this is basically how a buying process starts now is on these kind of peer-based review sites.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that the short list, right? And how critical that is, right now to the buyer's journey. And for whatever it's worth, it's funny because maybe I'm a little bit cool. I'm reconsidering, or I used to be cool because that was actually my first personal experience with getting a Pioneer stereo for my first car and having that installed. And that was a little bit before you could, go and look at as many reviews online. It was good old word of mouth, right? What have you used? So with that in mind, there's been such an acceleration, right, of, reviews over the last several years. And I'm curious, why do you think that criticality has increased so much to the buyer's journey? And you mentioned the short list, so that's at the beginning, and I think a lot of us think about it at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think the beginning, why it comes up in the beginning is because there's so much overwhelming choice now. There's in pretty much every space, there's going to be dozens of vendors now, and obviously as a buyer, you don't have the time or the energy to go do 27 evaluations, right? So you rely on this kind of crowdsourced evaluation power to narrow down your list. And then beyond there, it gets a little trickier. It's all right, now they have the short list. They all have anywhere from 4.5 stars out of 5, 4.8. How do I then decide between these 10 on my short list is a much more interesting problem that I think reviews haven't necessarily solved yet, or at least the kind of more Amazon style. It's kind of like a baseline test. You look at a product, you're like, all right, it's got to have a certain amount of reviews and high rating. And that's kind of the initial sniff test. But there's this whole more nuanced, once you've gotten past that, what makes for an influential review that I think is really interesting. So it's more complex and nuanced than I initially looked at. But, the sniff test is probably the first thing. You have to have some quantity and some good ones. most people do now. And then the question is, what do you do beyond that?
And I'm curious, on the last episode, I was chatting with Natalie and we were talking about organic advocacy. It's everything that you've discussed, right? Um, as far as like making that short list and you're going out there and you're doing your research, but then what? So you have the short list and that pushes you right to a website. As marketers, we want that to happen. We want folks to come to the website where we've got all of our customer stories, case studies, our videos and things like that, product demos. We want people to land there, but getting there and making sure that you have that presence early in the search. Are you work with a lot of marketers as well. Are you seeing that? Are you seeing more emphasis placed on the importance of reviews at the front end to kind of funnel traffic to the desired destination?
Yeah, I do think yes, because in the buyer's journey nowadays, vendors get to spend, comparatively much less time with the vendor and with the salesperson. So that a lot of, that first, call it 60 to 70% of the buyer's journey is now done through online research. And that may be, generational just because we don't like talking to people anymore or, for whatever reason. But yeah, I would assume that, and this probably came from like, a consumer oriented buying behavior, right? Where we get so used to buying stuff on Amazon or whatever e-commerce sites that we're just like, we expect that kind of experience. And so we want a digital oriented sales process without, having to talk to someone. Granted, if you're going to buy $150,000 shirt or something like that, you're going to need to talk to someone at some point. But I do think, trend wise, we're seeing more of that buyer's journey go before they talk to a salesperson into digitally enabled channels. And, the content that you want to be surfacing at that point, is credible information from peers and from customers, third party analysts potentially, that is going to kind of solve this early stage social proof problem where traditionally it might have been thought of as like very late stage, I need a reference or something like that. The abstraction of that reference into content, I think, is now going much earlier in the funnel.
And you mentioned reference, so this bonus question here, and then we'll get back to this quality versus quantity. What are some of your thoughts on references and their impact on the sales cycle, maybe now today versus previously, and do the reviews and references marry? Just love to get your take on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I just got off a call with hopefully will become a very big customer of ours, and they talked like live reference call to three of our references. It is super impactful. Like these are awesome conversations. It says such great things and all that. I wish I could do more of those. If I think about why that happened, it's a high $100,000 plus deal that probably merits that sort of live reference. But a majority of our deals are not that, and so we don't necessarily get asked for references. So we don't have a ton of control over whether we surface references or not. I think they're super impactful, but I don't think that's the question. The question is like, how do we, if we're not going to get asked, we have these awesome advocates, that would be awesome if they got on the phone, but no one's asking them to get on the phone. How can we still harness their story in a way where they can convey this awesome experience that they've had, but to, a broader audience? So I would say like, references are, for certainly solutions in the 10 to 50K range are probably a lot more rare than they were 6 or 7 years ago. I still think they're incredibly impactful if you can make them happen. But I would prep for a world where they probably happen, less often.
And do you think, because this had come up on a LinkedIn conversation not that long ago, and I did have to backtrack. I think I said like the one-to-one reference is dead, but what I really meant by that is in the traditional form. I think for a lot of us that are practitioners in this space, we think of it as, okay, there's an RFP or sales just reaches out and we have to have that one-to-one connection. But everything you said, I agree is spot on. I think in your example, those conversations and why they were so impactful and meaningful isn't because a prospect, I mean, nobody, they're not going to expect somebody to say like, boy, this solution really like, sucks, because
Right. Yeah.
I've offered up the reference, but it's the conversations and the connections and the use cases, right, that are discussed, and what are you doing with it, et cetera, which I think is a really nice segue into talking about this quality versus quantity. You and I are I think we can just say we're in agreement. Quality is more important, but why? From your perspective, why do you feel that's so? And then like, what does that actually mean, quality?
Yeah, I think defining what it means first will kind of answer the first question on why it's important. Good examples like so back to that story I was talking about where we're looking at a CRM to buy. I went to Salesforce's website obviously because they're the number one ranked on the grid, and I see a bunch of stories about how State Farm, for instance, using Salesforce to do digital transformation, whatever they're doing. And while very impressive, like didn't tell me anything about how a 2-person startup is going to use this and why I should choose it versus HubSpot, which is 30% cheaper, right? And so I think that relevance part, and relevance could be a function of same industry, same use case, same problem, same size. Those parameters will change based on the product, but I think that's probably one of the most interesting factors for quality. But the tough part there is that you can't have that hyper targeted relevance. Like in other words, for us, and we a small startup that is evaluating HubSpot in that Salesforce example without quantity, right? Because if you think of the permutations on that, Salesforce to selling to 16 different industries across 3 different size bands, and they have 20 different products, if they're going to accomplish that relevance, you need a lot of quantity to fill out that library. And I think that relevance is one of the things. There's another one which we can talk about, but one of the things that's an input in the quality equation is this reference or review or whatever it is similar and relevant to me in my scenario. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. And I was jotting down some notes, as I always do during these conversations, because there's all these like pearls of wisdom, and I wrote quality equals relevance, and I think that's actually quite brilliant, and it makes complete sense that the quality, as in what that means to me, is just that, the relevance of my particular situation, my particular use case, which is kind of, as we talk about, what does quality bring to the table, right? That quantity maybe cannot. I think that's the big piece of it, is the ability to see your reflection in that review or that feedback, etc. Not trying to
That's
get
a great way to put it. Yeah, your reflection
here, but
no, yeah, I think that's a really good analogy. Your reflection is exactly right. You're because if you think about it, what a buyer is trying to do is reduce risk, right? And the best way to do that is to understand that product has worked for someone that looks exactly like you. And so, yeah, I think that reflection element is very interesting. The other element of quality, which is I think kind of new, but probably has existed for a while too, is this element of like this kind of rawness or authenticness, or just human depth to it. I think over the past X amount of years, we've started to develop, I think a healthy spidey sense and skepticism for these kind of like curated, polished reviews. Like you go on Amazon, right, and like there's a bunch of 5-star reviews. They're like, yeah, this thing's awesome, and it's like, all right, great, good to see. But sometimes like the most useful ones that are like interesting are like those 3 and 4 stars that like have some good stuff to say, but they also have some constructive feedback. And oftentimes like those have the most like depth and interestingness, and you learn the most from those. And you feel like they weren't, just, spit out of a can from like a director's seat, right? And so I think there's something to that too. It's like, what's the kind of normal raw experience for an average customer that's probably a good reflection of me versus, what does the
Yeah.
top 5% of customers feel like?
And I agree. And there's all kinds of statistics that have come out now. And, when I was more focused on advocacy work and doing references, that one-to-one reference, even when I was bringing, customers into an advocacy program, I was very transparent with them in saying, when you give a reference, people don't trust, even though you're right there in the flesh or on the phone, they don't trust saying like, it's amazing. The product is good. I like it. I like it because it's good. Like there has to be something constructive, that comes from that, because not everything is perfection, and that's just not realistic. And as we've gotten a little more sophisticated, and then, I guess it's a natural progression, and, I move into the review space. Now I think it's the most recent numbers that five-star ratings or perfect ratings, people blast right past them, to your point. 4.7 and 4.5 to 4.7 is where people are reading, because that feels real, because you're probably going to find something constructive. And when now more than 95% of purchasing decisions have reviews involved in the buying process, you need to see all of it, and you need to be able to find yourself in it, but also go in eyes wide open. And I think also there really is something to be said for the constructive reviews, the critical reviews, and I think sometimes marketers, they shy away, likely because they're getting pressure from senior leadership, like, no, we only want the great reviews. And I spend a lot of time talking to marketers where there's a place for criticality, and you can grow from it as an organization, but actually your buyers need to see it as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, if you think now, listening to you talk, like I think about that, and it makes total sense, right? Like another thing on that is, if you don't have users that are making suggestions on how to improve the product and are writing critically about, what it's doing and how it can be better, it's probably a decent sign that like that product is not solving a meaty enough problem, and don't have users that care that much to go do that, right? If it's just a simple tool and they're like, yeah, it's great. It's like, all right, I write that off as like, cool, like not that meaningful to their day to day where they would care enough to go write about it a lot. But yeah, seeing users, even if it's, a mix of good and bad, invest time, into explaining the problem to solve and what can we better, I think demonstrates and is a decent proxy for like their commitment to that solution. So it's an interesting way to read into like how important this vendor is beyond just how they rate it.
Yeah, and it's very to kind of push it to the more personal, but even something like online dating, and you're looking at profiles, and nobody trusts, like, you want the stuff where somebody is real, they're authentic, which means, maybe they address the fact that, like, yeah, but, I'm not, so great in like large groups, like, so like that's not my scene. And just when people are honest and they can share that kind of information about, what, there's that authenticity that you were talking about. But so another question for you, because I get asked this question a lot, and I really want to have your take on it, Evan. Marketers that are struggling with balancing that kind of the need for that breadth, if you will, and I'll use that synonymously with quantity, but then also the depth and the quality. How do you do both, actually, so that you're kind of pleasing multiple masters? And it's usually like the leadership team and then what they need to actually be successful in their role.
Yeah, that is a tough question. And different functions within the company, meaning like sales, like high level brand leadership, are going to want different things, right? Let's stick with that Salesforce example. The brand C-level people probably want, the coolest stories out there, the Wells Fargos, the, State Farms or whatever. And then some random, mid-market rep, in the healthcare vertical selling Tableau or something, needs a specific story about that, right? So you do need to at least consider both needs, but your time is a finite resource. And obviously if you're Salesforce, you're not going to go create 15,000 in-depth, super high quality stories, right? So I do think that like concept of tiering your references or reference content is needed. So it's like if you want breadth and quantity, like you're going to have to templatize it more and use more one-to-many approaches of generating content at scale, which hopefully then does free you up to focus more on the smaller set of really high quality, high production stories. I think it's a miss where you only do one or the other. And then, if you only focus on quality, you're going to miss breadth and you're, for some reps aren't going to get what they need. Vice versa, if you only focus on quantity, you're going to have, it's going to lack, the authenticity, the polish that's needed for just a different type of use case. So I think, considering the audiences that you're serving and having some sort of tiering model where you can, if you do have a bunch of users, you can at least create some sort of social proof in a more automated, templatized, factory style manner while doing the more artistic, manual work with your best set of customers with the most interesting stories, I think is the right way to look at it.
I like that, the tiering, and I always talk about with reviews when I'm having conversations about diversification of your approach, right? Where you want to make sure, just as you're saying, that you have the right content or the right thing at the right time, depending on the audience. Same is true if you want to show up right at the right place at the right time. So when we're going back to the beginning of our conversation about making sure that you make that short list, that organic advocacy I was talking about, you have to have a presence in maybe more than one place. So I always try to tell marketers, like, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And I like this. I like the tiering the references. I like diversifying the reviews, because I think I know how you might answer this, but are prospects or buyers, in your opinion, relying more or less on reviews, and then that buyer journey, and then also that role of social proof in that journey? I just want to dig into that a little bit more deeply.
I think one of the most freeing and powerful concepts is to kind of relax the constraint on the form factor of, the broad social proof. So like sometimes you get so caught up in like, here's our case study template. If someone can't do that, that story is not worthwhile at all. Right. Or, if it doesn't fit this particular parameter for this particular review site, it's not going to work at all. So I think, different prospects are going to want to consume information in different ways. Some people might like this type of thing with an audio only podcast. Some people might be wanting to write something and read something. So having a diverse range of, outlets or content types or form factors, can be anonymous or named too. Just, don't throw away a good story just because it doesn't meet your threshold for, what your typical brand story looks like. If you can do that, it just allows a much broader representation of your user base to go speak out on your behalf and share their story, which, I think communicates a much more ample presence of happy customers for a brand. So that would be my piece of advice. I think, to answer your question, generically, yes, people rely on reviews and social proof more. I would say that, because the buyer's journey is so complex and kind of Byzantine and across all kinds of different channels, across all kinds of personal stakeholders, like you need to have a diverse portfolio of options to be able to communicate customer stories that don't put undue friction on customers.
I know everyone who's listening agrees wholeheartedly with that. Let me ask you for your advice out to those that are listening to help get that buy-in, that there's that word again, diversification, of the content is the way to go. And I'm specifically kind of zeroing in on everybody's favorite, the anonymous versus, named logos. What advice do you have for people about how to push that forward when maybe there's some friction internally?
Great question. There's a language thing that's important, right? I think people that aren't familiar with this kind of stuff reach for the term case study or reference because that's what they're familiar with. But underneath what they're actually asking for, let's say it's a sales rep, it's like, hey, I need a reference of healthcare. What they're actually might be asking, you don't know yet to ask, but is we need some evidence to show this prospect that we've worked for people that in their space, in their situation, they don't necessarily care what the form is. So the way you frame that, the terminology that you use is important. I think on the anonymous thing, the way you frame that is important as well. Back to our authenticity thing, though, like what I've noticed, so user evidence, just a little context on the solution. It's basically a survey tool where we capture thousands of responses from a vendor's customers and then create content from it. Anecdotally, what I've noticed is that like the anonymous content tends to be much more interesting and kind of in that 4.2 star range where they do talk about stuff that can be improved, and they share more detail about their use case, which I think makes the story a lot more impactful. Obviously the names and logos are cool, but you tend to get a lot more like, yeah, this thing is great. So two different things. Obviously you need to have a cool logo on the homepage of your website, but provided you've done that, which a lot of big vendors have, I would argue that the content of the story is a lot more, and the relevance of that story is a lot more important than the logo on it.
I agree, and I think we were talking earlier about we just touched on it, but around that authenticity, and let's dive in just for a second about the trustworthiness around reviews. That topic has, I think I've seen that more in the last 12 months than I have in the last several years, as far as, well, can the content be trusted? I mean, we have AI and, things that are generating content and things like that. I'm just curious kind of your thoughts on that. And then also the fact that there's even like the FTC has weighed in and taking that very seriously, cracking down on like, no, you cannot just generate random, content. But I'm curious just your general thoughts on that, but then also if you agree with me that, I mean, I think buyers are getting pretty savvy that they can pick through, what's actually authentic and what they can trust. But any comments on that?
I think they are, which is, all the more reason why like you need to give customers, safe channels through which they can share candidly about their experience. And again, like even for us, like we did a big website announcement, and we'll do a big press release next week about this, but we were trying to get quotes for, that press release. And I talked to customers that have before given us really meaty, like detailed, awesome quotes. And so I went back to them hoping they would give us that for the press release. And then they, of course, put it through their PR process, and we got this, totally vanilla sounding, boring quote like, oh, user evidence is such a great partner for, amplifying our go-to-market strategies or something like that. And it's just like, man, like that's cool that they're on the logo, but you can just tell there's no meat or specificity to this story. And that is a bummer, right? And so, allowing these lower friction channels and safe channels, and that's why I think anonymous contact can be hugely valuable, provided it's verified and people aren't just making it up. But I think people are past that. It's like, and it doesn't matter. Like a marketing team couldn't make up a lot of these stories anyway. Like you can tell a real one from a marketing oriented story just because the specificity is not something that you could recreate. So I'm all for, if you think about it in an employee world in like a Glassdoor sense, right? I'm all for giving people safe channels where they can share comfortably outside of this kind of vanilla fabricated, like PR, emblazoned, world.
Yes, I agree. And I think just to to add to that, because I also agree with what you were saying about, anonymous versus named. Sometimes I'm asked, well, but they only want, named. And usually my feedback to that would be this, right? The buyers are getting that much more savvy. It's very easy to pick out what's authentic and what's not. And then also understanding the fact that if you push, and that's fine, you can push for that logo and that name, but to your point, all you're going to get is what's been approved. And approved means that it has been watered down, etc. So I've actually tried to encourage marketers to, use it. Like, do you want actual feedback on the product? Does your product marketing team, do they really want the feedback on the product and how it's doing, so that we can either continue to enhance what's working or we can go and fix what's not? Then we have to accept anonymous feedback coming in, or we have to provide, to your point, those safe spaces and channels. And I think we'll start seeing a lot more of that. And I think we'll start seeing a lot more, verification and regulation around the review content. I think that's a good thing. And I, just as much as I think it's okay to have anonymous user feedback. So
I think, for a side note on that, I think the FTC will, be okay at solving that in a consumer world. I do not think they'll get it around anytime soon to try and to solve that in a B2B context. But yeah, on the authenticity thing, it's like, look, you can throw, pasteurized part still, white mozzarella cheese from a Kraft bag up on your website, or you can serve, stinky blue cheese that's like direct from a cow. One's safer perhaps, but one's a lot more interesting, really. So I think, leaning towards like finding a couple of good nuggets that really shine and smell and speak, versus just a bunch of, kind of milquetoast stuff.
And arguably more enjoyable too, right? I mean, come on, everyone out there is guilty of, like, I'll go back to the Amazon example of, like, you read the 1 star, you do, just to see.
That was one idea I had. I was going to create a coffee table book called 0 Stars. I just never got around to it, with like just the funniest negative reviews. I think would be a great coffee table book. But
what, if you're looking, there's another collaboration for us, Evan. We'll go out and we'll find all the, the 0 star reviews, because there's some
gems.
There's some really good ones. You know what? When we post this episode, and then I promise I'll get to the last question, but maybe I'll put a link to my favorite, like, Amazon review of all time, and it's for gummy bears, and we'll just leave it at that. Okay, so in closing, because I so appreciate your time, and I know how busy you are, but I always ask all of the guests for kind of a piece of, parting thoughts, piece of advice. What would you offer up? You've had a really interesting and very fast-paced career, that kind of you wish you would have known then that you know now. What would you offer up?
I think my biggest concern right now in this market, particularly in customer marketing, right, over the last couple of years, like, it was hot for a second, and it was like the number 3 fastest growing job, and then it kind of crashed, and people are getting laid off, and everyone's nervous and everything like that. I think the natural tendency, like, when things get tougher, is to, like, tighten up and kind of play it safe and do the kind of outrun the bear thing. Like, as long as you're not the slowest person, like, you're safe. And as a leader in a company, like, it just doesn't work. And I see a little prevalence of, like, very conservative decision making and just kind of trying to blend in and hide at these bigger companies. And I think that those people will be cut. And so my advice would be just, like, be aggressive, like, run programs, start something new, take ownership and go solve problems in these organizations and make some noise about it. Make some mistakes too. For me personally, like, if someone messes something up, but they showed some initiative to go organize a program and deliver on something, or try to deliver on something, that's going to stand out a lot more to me than someone who didn't make a mistake and just played it safe. So that would be my advice, is just, like, while it might feel counterintuitive, like, make some moves, take some risks in this environment. Your career will thank you for it.
That's that's really great advice, especially from, you've come so far and accomplished so much in your career. And I I I I love that, and I'm gonna make turn that into an analogy if you don't mind, because I know you have a little one and one on the way. So they're not as old as my two girls, but it's like when I walk into the kitchen and it's a complete disaster zone, right? But my 13-year-old is sitting at the table and she has made herself lunch.
Yeah.
Like, I applaud that. Am I thrilled that it's, going to take 45 minutes to probably clean up the kitchen? No, but I appreciate the fact that there was initiative. There was a problem. She solved the problem, took the initiative to solve the problem. And if there's a little bit of cleanup that has to happen afterwards, that's the teaching moment. And so I
Exactly.
hope you
love
don't
that.
mind me
Yeah.
kind of taking that and
No, she created something, right? That creation is invaluable in the company, and it shows growth and kind of boldness, which I think is needed in this environment.
yeah, I agree. Well, Evan, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. This is one of my favorite topics. I just really appreciate your insight and everything from your learning and experience. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Allison. It was fun to chat with you.
And to everyone, I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. Feel free to share, tune in to other episodes. It's hard to believe that we're already well on our way to 20 episodes, and this is just a blast. It's the favorite part of my job. So thank you guys for allowing me to do it. Thanks again for joining us. Don't forget to follow me, Allison Bukowski, on LinkedIn, where you'll find information about upcoming episodes, Q&A sessions, and live panel discussions with our guests. CustomerX Files is brought to you by PeerSpot, the authority on enterprise technology. The PeerSpot Buying Intelligence platform is where tech professionals go to get the most reliable information on enterprise tech so they can be sure that what they buy is exactly what they need. Powered by a community of over 650,000 enterprise tech professionals who share expertise, PeerSpot provides in-depth reviews, buyer's guides, online forums, and more, giving professionals the confidence to make the right buying decision. For more info, check out marketing.peerspot.com. And to keep getting this show in your podcast feed every time a new episode drops, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.